Hello and welcome. This is video number one in a five-part series about nationalism. In this video, we're going to try to keep it pretty simple. This is basically going to be an introduction to nationalism. So I will talk a little bit about what nationalism is and try to describe some of the characteristics that make up nationalism that would be applicable really wherever you're talking about, whether you're trying to ascertain the degree of nationalism and nationalistic feelings that exist in America versus other countries around the world, China, India, wherever you might be talking about. So hopefully it'll be helpful to at least get a better sense of what nationalism is if this is a new topic for you. And hopefully you'll tune in for the other videos that will take a closer look at different places around the world and how nationalism has affected them. So I hope you enjoy the video. I want to just take a look at a definition or maybe a way of thinking about what nationalism is. I guess before I speak more to that, maybe take a step back and talk about the time frame when this kind of concept was beginning to develop, which was basically in the early half of the 1800s, especially in the years following the end of the Napoleonic Wars. You had a variety of different perspectives floating around Europe in particular about what was the best way to set up society. You had the more conservative, traditional folks that really wanted to see things as they'd always been, with your basic, king in charge, and they make all the decisions. You had some people that were a little more in the middle that were thinking, some kind of a parliamentary body or a congressional body of people to make decisions on behalf of everybody would be a good idea. And then, of course, you had some people that were on that opposite from the conservative view that really thought that it should just be kind of in the hands of all the people, sort of, perspective that the French Revolution was all about. That should be how things were. And so a lot of competing ideas. And in the middle of all of that would emerge a perspective that we would really come to understand as nationalism, which was this growing idea, coming from the people living in a variety of different places, that maybe their focus shouldn't be on a king or a particular leader, but rather the nation or land where they lived and the people that were within it, that's where their loyalty should be. That's where their focus should be. And where you had places that there were a lot of common things that were shared, that's where you tended to find the strongest nationalist feelings and the greatest likelihood that people would be thinking this way or starting to think this way. And so now we'll go through some of these characteristics in more detail here in just a second, but basically the more different ways people could connect and feel connected to each other and feel like they had some sameness and something in common, the stronger those bonds usually were, the stronger those feelings of nationalism typically were. And then in terms of what we'll be looking at today with the unification of Germany is when you began to find places where people were starting to feel connected in a variety of different ways. One of the things they wanted was some kind of a government system that would reflect that. And so as we begin to see things like the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy, that's the beginning of what we typically call nation states, where we see countries emerge out of this desire for people to be connected by a government that reflected how they felt about themselves and in the place where they lived. So one thing that I think can help in thinking about, what might go into the development of a nation state and what nationalism builds off of is to look at this chart. And you can see that there's 6 different things identified. I'll start kind of like a clock, starting with history. And that basically as we go through each of these 6 things, the more ways people feel common and connected, generally the stronger the nationalistic feelings. So starting with history, it says a common past or common experiences. If you have people that have been living in the same area for a long time, many generations of families living there, there's a lot of different things that they have in common, a lot of different experiences they've had, both good and bad. And usually the more common experiences people have together, the closer they are. I mean, basically think, someone you've been friends with for your whole life, you've experienced a lot of different things, highs, lows, goods, bads, all that. When you put it all together, that represents probably a strong bond. Whereas if it's somebody you've just met and you don't have much of a past or past connections with them, your friendship's just probably not as deep or as strong. Moving to language, it says different dialects of one language, one dialect becoming a national language. Generally speaking, the more the same people are in how they speak in a given place, the more closely connected they are. It's not necessarily good or bad whether there's only one language or many languages, but certainly that's an important way to communicate. And when you can have more people that can easily communicate, you tend to be closer together. Um, and when it says national language, there are places around the world that have a national language, something that people are required to know and understand and speak. That's one thing that's kind of unique in our country. We may have a language like English that lots of people use, but we don't have a national language in our country. You can freely use any language that you want. Territory, a certain territory that belongs to the ethnic group that thinks of it as its land. Depending on where you're talking about in the world, there may be connections people feel to where they live that go back centuries or beyond 1,000 years. Maybe it doesn't go back that far, but any place that does feel like the place where they are is not just a place they've ended up, but a place that belongs to them, the stronger the nationalistic feelings tend to be. Nationality kind of fits in with that, belief in a common ethnic ancestry that may or may not be true. So if they feel like, the people that are around in the present have come from, a common thread of people from a common place, they tend to feel more connected. A religion shared by all or most of the people. Religion's definitely something that can either really connect people or maybe even cause people to feel apart. And if you've got, say, a country where all people in that country share the same faith, that can be a strong connection. That's another good example with our country here in the United States. We don't have a national religion. People have lots of different faiths or no faith. That's definitely not necessarily a way that really connects us here, but there are certainly places around the world where that's a strong connection through and through. And then culture, shared way of life, and this can be all types of things like what kind of food you eat, what clothes you wear, things you do, what you value. And again, the stronger the connections and all those different ways are between the people living in a given place, the more likely they have those nationalistic feelings. And so, again, as it relates to ideas like unification of Germany, unification of Italy, that you'll get to see some information about, hear some information about in John Green's video, as people develop these more nationalistic feelings and shifted their loyalties away from, say, individual leaders to the place where they lived and the people that made up that place, it became ever more important for people who didn't necessarily have a country to reflect that, to develop that. And so